Hi, welcome back to FutureFast. And today we have a very interesting guest. And before I jump into introducing our guest, uh, for those of you who are here for the first time, FutureFast is an effort to bring in people who are doing things which are potentially going to be impacting on the future. And also, these people, the ladies and gentlemen that we bring on to this to have a conversation, are surely doing things that are going to have an impact on the future. And also in the course, we'll try to understand what are they doing and how are they looking at preparing for the future and the challenges as they see, and also perhaps to get an understanding of the industry ecosystem and the challenges of the future that as they see, so that it could be some kind of flag for us if we have to be cautioned about, or even some tips to prepare with. And also, we will have our guests to talk about their perspective on the future, which I'm sure many of you will enjoy. And I, for one, surely enjoy. And that's why we try to bring in people like Bart Remes. Bart is native of Dutch and lives in Singapore. And he's an economist and he works with small, medium, and large companies and helping them use economics to make decisions, business decisions across the things. And for more understanding of it, we will get Bart to talk about it. But Bart, welcome back, or rather, welcome for the first time to Future Fast. My bad.
Thank
I'm
you
so
very
used
much.
to saying welcome back to my audience that I ended up
Okay.
saying.
All right.
And,
Thank you very much for the invite. Much appreciate.
Bart, to start with, can we get our audience to understand your journey so far from your life, what you got started to where you are today?
All right. So I'm originally from Belgium. Okay, from the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. All right. And I have been living in Singapore for quite a number of years. And what I'm doing today is actually a little bit by accident. So as a kid, I had two interests that I wanted to figure out. Number one is I like cars and I wanted to understand how car suspension actually works. So how the wheels actually are connected to the car and how you can calculate that, the strength that you need and stuff like that. But I also grew up in the 1970s, and the 1970s in Europe and US were bad economic times, because that's when you had stagflation, which means you had high inflation and also high unemployment. So it was not supposed to happen. So it was bad economic times, and my family, they were business people. And as a kid, I constantly had to hear, it's bad economic times. The world is going down. The prime minister was saying that I typed into my computer, we see the light at the end of the tunnel. I was actually interested in that, like, how does that thing work? Okay, so how can I learn about that and use that later in life? So when I came out of secondary school, I went to a baccalaureate system, so not the Anglo-Saxon O levels and A levels. I went to baccalaureate. And so instead of going for engineering, I thought, like, you know what, I'm going to study economics. I studied something which is called applied economics with a specialization in quantitative economics. So I thought, like, when I do all this, easy, I will understand how the world works and what I can do with that stuff. So after all these years of hanging around at university, eventually I got a master's degree in the stuff and had no clue how the world works. The interesting parts for me were stuff like anthropology, philosophy, mathematics, statistics, geography, history, and especially history of economic theory, and so forth. But with all the stuff about hardcore economics, stuff like econometrics, macroeconomics, microeconomics. I thought, like, when I came out, like, what can I do with this stuff? It was actually nothing at all. So I started, after that I had to go to the army for doing my military service, because that's what happened in Belgium. So doing your duty for king and country, so to speak. I was into Germany, came out, couldn't find a real job that I liked, and I landed up in an IT company, a service provider, selling IT systems. So I was selling all these computers, PCs, AS400s, all the cables, because networking came about. That was interesting. And I was not trained for that, but you have to do what you have to do. And it was selling information systems. But it was one thing I remembered from my studies, and that was the price mechanism is actually a great information system. So on one hand, I was selling all these cables and connecting them with computers and X25, X400 networks before we had the internet popping up. I was like, okay. But in the back of my mind, I had that stuff like, hey, what is this with information systems? The price mechanism is a huge information system.
This was which year?
That must have been the early 1990s.
Early 90s.
And so when I studied economics, there was two courses that were actually of interest to me. Number one is the history of economic theory. Number two was industrial economics. And in industrial economics, there was a mention, one small paragraph of an article about a chap named Friedrich von Hayek, who wrote that the price mechanism is an information system. And he had won a Nobel Prize in economics. So I was like, hey, wait a second, that's interesting. Why is this guy not part of the history of economic theory? So there was a sort of disconnect. I didn't think too much through it. I just floated around into my IT career. Started working for the next company and the next. That's all how I got to meet my wife, she's Singaporean Chinese. So when we got married, I came to Singapore. So you can consider me as a male import right into Singapore. So like initially it was very difficult. I quit my IT career and I started working in recruitment. It's a job that made me decent money, but I sincerely disliked it because it was like a wheeler-dealer type of business between employer and employee. Now, there is nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong, except it's not me. My strength is taking complex things and explaining that to people that they understand.
I completely relate with you because there was a small stint in my life as well, which echoes with the same thing. So it's really funny, but I can completely relate with you because I've gone through the same thing.
Yeah. So then came that crisis of 2008, the real estate bubble that burst, and I had no clue what was going on. And so like I was reading these newspapers and like, what is this now? That's when I decided, guys, I've had enough. I'm just going to do what I like. And I'm going to create a company that explains economics to business people. Because I know that my strength is I can explain things in a way that people actually understand. The small detail is that I had no clue what economics was all about. And I didn't realize that business people have zero interest in economics. So like, there was like, I didn't realize that what I was doing is selling computers, IT systems in the 1970s, in the 1980s, where only governments and large companies or banks are interested in computers. Only normal companies, they don't have computers. They have small calculators and stuff like that. So the shift was not done yet. Today, we all use computers in our daily lives.
Including kids.
Yeah, including kids. So like my kids ask me, Dad, how can you have lived without the internet and without a smartphone. Like they think I come from a dinosaur age, but so, but so with economics, we are now at the same point of flexing, whereas most people think like, why should I understand anything about that? I have zero interest. So it was very difficult for me to sell my stuff. And number two is I had to find economic language that actually can relate to business people. And so in economics, what I understood from studying history of economic theory while I was at university, what happened there is like, hey, guys, you know what? There are different schools of economic theory. You can relate that maybe to physics. In physics in the Middle Ages, so I come from Europe, but in the Middle Ages, people thought that the sun was going around Earth. Yeah. Now we know that's not the case. That is actually the opposite. Yeah. In economics, you also have still the same type of discussions about, is the sun going around the Earth or the Earth going around the sun? An example, is supply creating demand or demand creating supply? That kind of.
But just oh, two interesting things. I'm sure you will find it interesting that, for thousands of years in Indian temples, there's something called Navagraha, which is basically the 9 planets.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, the planetary system. And in India, they are also worshipped, but it was always referred to as Navagraha, where 9 planets, and in the center is the sun.
Yeah.
With 9 planets around it. And that has been there for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we, unfortunately, in India also waited for, the Dutch initially and then the British to come in and rewrite our textbooks and then teach us that Europeans discovered it.
Yeah, no, it was like, so when people have to change their ideas, murders are committed because these people that figured out that, hey, the sun is not going around the earth, it's the opposite stuff. I mean, it was against religion and stuff like that. So people were burned alive to figure that out. It was very sad. But in economics, today, you still have the same. So I would say that in economics today, you have actually 4 major schools of economics.
Mm-hmm.
And so to explain these schools turning from left to right, and then I also will explain to you how I position myself in those theories. So on the most extreme left side, you have Marxism. That's from Karl Marx, a very dodgy guy with his friend Friedrich Engels, and he was going to destroy capitalism. Yeah. It's a complete wrong theory, and it never worked. Today, you can see the glorious things of Marxism, sadly, in North Korea. Prior to that, in China under Mao, Venezuela, Soviet Union, you name it, that's what you see. Then in around the 1930s is another school that picked up, which is Keynesian economics, developed by Lord Keynes. That's actually mainstream economics. So when you go to university, they teach you mainstream economics, which is based on the stuff that Lord Keynes from Cambridge, UK, developed. Yeah. That's about fiscal policy, monetary policy, etc., etc. It has no connection at all with business. They have total disrespect for what people are doing. It's all about trust us, the government will make sure that you become rich. Just we tax you, we borrow money from you, we print money, and everything will be fine. So that is actually, when you read the newspapers, that's what it's all about. And politicians love it, by the way.
It gives them the control and power.
Yes, when you're a politician, what you want to do is you want to say, vote for me, and I will create 10,000 jobs. So it's so I'm an entrepreneur. I can't create 10,000 jobs just like that. But anyway, so that's a little bit of a different story. The third school, that is the Chicago School. And that actually, the big person there is a man named
Milton
Milton.
Friedman.
Yeah. And so a very smart guy. And he made fantastic contributions to the economy. And the vision of that school is we need to have free markets. The government needs to be as small as possible. Let people do what they want to do. And that's correct. The only thing we have to do is to say we need to we need to manage money. So we need to make sure that there is enough money in the economy, which means that if the economy grows at 5%, then the amount of money needs to grow also at 5%. So that is what Milton Friedman did. He was not the first guy to come up with that. The first one is actually a chap from Yale University, Irving Fisher, and he came up with that famous formula about the velocity of money. Not sure whether that rings a bell. Like
Yes.
M times V equals P times Q, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that's nothing wrong with that formula. It's correct, but it doesn't say anything about cause and effect. It just looks at the surface. So but, a person that loved Milton Friedman was, amongst others, Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan in the 1980s said, hey guys, we need to come up, do business again, etc., etc. So that's that story. And then you have the fourth school. So number one is Marx, number two is Keynes, number two is Chicago, and number four is the Austrian School of Economics. And that is what I never studied at university. But that is where the price mechanism is a gigantic information system. And it's the kind of stuff that you're not supposed to know. And the reason why they call it Austrian school is because many of these thinkers of that school come from Austria, Vienna, the capital of Austria. So that's like, and in that school, the whole idea is small government. Government is important, of course, to imply the rule of law, to make sure that there is security, that the borders are covered and stuff like that. But don't mess around with the economy. Number two is stay away from money. So no central bank. Okay, don't print money out of nowhere. And key in the idea of the Austrian school is the role of business, the role of the entrepreneur. Yeah. So when I discovered that, I thought like, aha, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. And so to relate it to Singapore, where I'm based, key thinkers in that school are people like Karl Menger, people like Ludwig von Mises, people like Eugen von Bohm-Bawerk, but the most famous one is Friedrich von Hayek. And so he won a Nobel Prize in 1974 for his studies on business cycle theory. He was a student of Ludwig von Mises. Mises is for me the guy that I base my stuff on. Margaret Thatcher, she was an Austrian school advocate. So she said, Hayek is what we need to understand. Singapore, how it relates to Singapore, is one of the founding fathers of Singapore, which is Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. He also understood Austrian economics. And in his books, he writes, if you want to understand literature or appreciate literature, read Shakespeare. What else can he write? But he also says, if you want to understand economics, read Hayek. So few people in my country, Singapore, understand that. So when I talk to local people here, they say, what is this? Where do you know? How do you get all this from? And so in a nutshell, to summarize up these four schools, is Marx is class-based economics, the rich versus the poor, the haves versus the have-nots. Take it from the rich at all costs and give it to the poor, Robin Hood kind of style. Keynesian economics is labor-based economics. It's like we need to create jobs. Everybody needs to have a job. We don't care what it is. Let's say I'm a politician. I'm going to create 10,000 jobs. I give 5,000 spades to 5,000 people that they can dig a hole, and then I give 5,000 spades to.
That's the core philosophy of these public works departments, right?
Yes,
Creating
yes.
infrastructure development and creating jobs.
Yeah. Even if it's useless jobs, because Keynes refers to that. He says the old Egyptians, they created a pyramid. And frankly speaking, 3 pyramids are better than 1. There was no unemployment. The Middle Ages, we made cathedrals. 2 cathedrals are better than 1. No unemployment. So he says, why now not in the 1930s create 2 train tracks from London to Manchester instead of just 1? At least we make jobs for people. They get an income and everything will be well. And you may think I'm joking, but Keynes actually writes that in his books.
Oh, okay.
You can check that out. Okay. So the third school, that Chicago school, that is money-based economics. So we need free markets, but we need to have a continuously increase of money so that the prices remain stable. And then Austrian School Economics is capital-based economics, which means that entrepreneurs will come up with machines, ideas, production, human capital,
But
financial capital.
it's Milton Friedman is the market managed.
And I would say he believes in free markets, except for money. Money needs to be controlled by the government.
By the government, yes.
But Milton Friedman also says that stuff like fractional reserve banking, which is what banks do, create money out of nowhere, he's not agreeable with that. Milton Friedman, maybe in a later point of the conversation, we can elaborate on that one. A student of him is Ben Bernanke. That's the guy that was running the
No,
federal.
but that would be very unfortunate to say Ben Bernanke as a student of Milton Friedman. That is to take away the credit out of Friedman.
Um, so Friedman.
I mean, that comment is not fair, but
No, I would say that
he
Friedman.
may have studied there, but it's very unfair to Milton Friedman to say Ben Bernanke is a product of Milton Friedman.
No, we can elaborate later on that in the conversation if you
Sure.
bring it up. But so Milton Friedman really contributed a lot. So there is no doubt about it. But Milton Friedman, he was not the best of friends with the Austrian school. So in example, Hayek at one point in time was looking for a job. So he was allowed to teach at Chicago University. But Milton Friedman said, he's welcome here. He can teach anything what he wants except economics. So, so all these guys, they did not always get along very well. Right?
It sounds more like that generational American arrogance, like Ford saying you can buy any car as long as it's black.
Yeah, I don't know that I don't know. So, so that's a bit of positioning. What I'm doing is so I use Austrian economics to explain to entrepreneurs and business people how the world works, and what economics is actually all about. And the tools I use for that is mental models. So mental models are these little ideas that you have in your head, and that allows you to see things that you normally would not see.
Correct. So, see, you studied economics, and the time you actually got started with where you chose that economics is the space that you want to pursue, right? From whatever the sales and operations and even recruitment jobs that you had to when you became an entrepreneur and you chose to go in this direction. So, what did you do? So, how did you uh, freeze on Austrian School of Economics, which you obviously didn't study in your
Yeah.
education academics? So, what was that? Uh, that what do you call a trigger for you to look at this? Because it is natural that you had studied, and so in some sense you're qualified to talk about economics because that's your qualification, right? You
Yeah,
primarily studied, your academic background is there, and it was a lot easy to go after that.
yeah. So I would say I studied all that stuff at university. So I have the pieces of paper to prove that I studied Keynesian economics, and I
Correct.
had my dose of Chicago economics as well as my dose of Marxist stuff, and why it doesn't work. But the trigger for me was that there was
But
that,
your real life experience, that
yeah,
work
the
which
real life,
said that,
yeah, the
okay,
real life experience. So when I was working in the 1990s in IT on a sideline, I was actually investing a lot in the stock market, um, in the upcoming technology. And so I bought tons of shares of IT companies. I'm not going to mention you the names of the companies. Okay. And frankly speaking, I went from rags to riches and back. that was that was what happened in the 19 in the early 2000s. So like, okay, well, why is that I don't understand what's going on here? And then in 2008, when that crash happened, I had to work about 6 months almost without hardly making an income. And my neighbor, or one of my neighbors, he was working for a big American bank that went bankrupt. And these guys were bailed out. And so the, the guy even got his bonus because he bought a huge BMW 7 Series with that fancy suspension that I never understood how it works. So like, yeah. So I thought it was so unfair. That's, for me, that was a trigger. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And it took me a while to figure out how the stuff works and actually what happens. But it's also thanks to the internet, where there's tons of information that's available for free, where you can study all these things and then download tons of books and reading materials in PDF. And then you can come up with your own ideas and your own stories. I wish I would have learned it much earlier, but hey, life is what it is.
it was. How did you, when you got started with this, how was the reception? How did people take it?
Um, it was, uh, I used to sell IT and as an employee. And what happened is when you sell IT equipment or services as an employee, you work for a company. So you have a product, there's a certain branding,
Correct.
there's a certain reputation, and you can do your business. Yeah. And it's all about who do you know and who knows who, and do you have a website and stuff like that. When I was doing recruitment, it was like, how many people do you know in the market? Same kind of stuff. When I started with my own company, I didn't have a salary. So like there was nobody to pay me money at the end of the month. So I had to go through a hard lesson to understand what marketing actually is. Yeah. And marketing is how do you communicate the value of what you have to your clients. So at the beginning, I tried to call up people and say, hey, I'm an economist. Do you want to buy my stuff? The answer that I got was actually 2 words. The second word of which was off. I'm not going to say the first word. Right?
But but that's a very classic first mistake most entrepreneurs do.
Yeah,
The typical thing is to say, okay, I know this is what is the world needs because I can do it best.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that, okay, the moment I put it out to the world will stand in line to buy it. I
No,
think,
it's a classic situation. It's like, I'm going to create a fantastic product. I spent years and years and years in doing that, and then it all comes together and this fantastic, nice thing. And what happens is then I have it, and people will find me and come and ring at my door and buy it from me. And then
right.
I have a long queue of people buying it from me, and I will be rich. So that's a classic mistake that entrepreneurs make.
Correct.
So
Correct.
being there, done that.
Right. So, see, there are usual challenges of otherwise entrepreneurs is that that you first pursue towards the work towards building a product uh, from a point of saying that this is the product, how it works. See, and
Mhm.
economics uh, uh, is something. See, first of all, most people grow up with thinking that this is something for the government, like you said, right? This is how the
Government,
government
big banks, big companies.
uses, and yes, banks and lately large enterprises, because I think even I don't know. Look, first time I heard about a chief economist in a company was about
Mhm.
10, 15 years ago, max.
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah,
I heard about a chief economist even 15 years before that. I mean,
yeah.
before 15 years since. First time I came across the role of chief economist was sometime around that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So even then, it's the perception still to a great extent is that it is for very large enterprises, which are obviously, operating out of multiple geographies or banks, obviously, because one, that they deal with lots of money and also
Mhm.
very intertwined with the government because of all the compliance and policies and the government by itself. So, so you obviously are taking on uh, uh, a Goliath here from a perception wise.
Yes, and somehow I didn't realize when I started with in my journey. But most people, when you talk about them about economics, they think about the stock market. Can you make predictions for me about the future? Shall I
Right,
buy a house now or whatever?
right,
All that kind of stuff. Yeah. Um, People think that economics is about money and is about goods and services. But when you understand that Austrian School of Economics, which is capital-based economics, it's very different. Economics is not about goods and services. Economics is about people. Economics is about human choice and action. And in order to understand how the world works, you need to understand how people work, how people make choices, and how people take actions. And in order to do that, you can't study groups or societies or cities or countries. You need to go to the smallest unit of account. And the smallest unit of account is the individual. It's you yourself. How do people make their decisions, smart decisions or not so smart decisions, to achieve what they want? Because you want a lot of things, but you only can do as much as you want, as you can in one day. You only have as much money as you have and as much energy. And so you start from that. And then the next step is these individuals, they start exchanging with other individuals. And then you build it up further and further and further. And after a while, you understand how the world actually functions.
right. Here, but don't you think uh, much of these are very commonsensical, and also many people actually started employing it in their own businesses, but perhaps not really coming across perhaps Hayek's papers or these
Yeah.
Austrian economics, but the course of business taught them, and they started actually working on it because uh, don't you think there is a natural evolution also bringing about many people to do it? Uh,
Yes,
this
yes.
did happen, right? I mean, for one, the unit economics. I think
Yeah.
you would perhaps attribute unit economics as one of the essence of Austrian economic
Uh,
school.
yeah. I would say that in the Austrian school, so it's capital-based economics. And so all that capital, which is capital goods, machines, factories, human capital, blah, blah, whatever, blah, blah, blah. All that is actually made by entrepreneurs who take action and do things step by step by step. They make many mistakes, but when they succeed, they succeed. Now, the successful entrepreneurs, those are usually people that didn't study too much. Yeah. When you look at, say, Henry Ford, Thomas Watson, he was the guy that created IBM, Steve Jobs, and you go round and round. So
likewise, even in India, in fact, the founder of Reliance, India's largest conglomerate, was founded by Dhirubhai Ambani, who was, I think, studied until class 7 or so.
So, but the thing, what all these guys have in common is they have a lot of common sense. And actually, they are all applying Austrian School of Economics without knowing it, without realizing
the
it.
power, understanding, or even the label, perhaps.
Yes, that's what happens. Yeah. So, in example, when you look at a company, the key thing, what makes a company profitable or successful, is that people buy your products. Yeah. If you create something and nobody buys it, yeah, too bad, you go bankrupt. If you have quite some money, it will take you a bit of a longer time to go bankrupt. So what the Austrians say is that the real bosses of the company is not the owner or the entrepreneur or the stock market, the stockholders. The real bosses of the company are the clients, the customers. You have to give to the clients and the customers what they want. If you don't do it, too bad, you're wiped out. A classic example is what you saw a couple of years ago when smartphones came about.
Right.
So in the early 2000s, if you wanted to be a cool guy, the phone you had to have was a BlackBerry or a Nokia or a Palm phone. Yeah. So I had a Palm phone. And then Steve Jobs came up with that idea to create a phone that was very expensive, without buttons, with a low battery life, blah, blah, blah. But it could run apps. And so the guy that was running not smartphones, the other one, the Blackberries, he said, well, I don't need that because we can do it to the browser. But so if you don't give what the clients want, you're out. And BlackBerry phones, Nokia and Palm, they were out of business in a span of 1 or 2 years' time.
But ironically, we are coming a full circle and trying to get everything working through the browser. But that you're right. And one more thing, I want to just pick your brain here. See, we have Reliance. I'm sure you're familiar with Reliance. So Reliance has done many things pretty similar. One of the things that Reliance did when they got started with their mobile service business a few years ago, which changed its avatar in different sense. And today, it's there as Reliance Geo. It's a rather a new version, I can say. But first time when they, even in Geo, they did the same thing pretty much. What they offered is that they flooded the market at a low cost. In fact, the first time they came into mobile service, they went after CDMA. They didn't start with GSM.
Yeah.
So they went to CDMA and they made, I think they got it done out of China, but a very low cost, possibly the lowest cost possible. And they pushed it at such a low cost. And if you buy the device, you pretty much get free service for some time. So it literally got to a point of adding millions of new users every month. In fact, Reliance added mobile users every month what rest of the mobile operators were adding in a year.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know that. Okay, yeah.
Oh, it was almost a bloodbath for many of the other mobile operators, but for the market, for the population, it was great. It was great because you could literally see today, post the COVID situation, we have UPI. I'm not sure if you're familiar with UPI. It's a digital payment system which Government of India brought in, which has got people from almost any strata of life. the low street hawker, street vendor, perhaps not at all educated, can sell or does sell anything
Yeah.
for a small thing as 10 rupees or even 5 rupees using UPI payment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the digital payment could happen with a street hawker because almost 10 years ago, Reliance pushed this phone into each of these hands as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, and at that point of time, obviously, one, they were just taking in new users because they had to come in and they had to take the users and they were pretty much running in losses. So they
Mm-hmm.
just flooded the market, gave it out cheap, and they started billing almost after a year.
Yeah.
So by then, people were so used to it that they didn't see much of a challenge in keeping up with that. The fallout was very small.
Mm-hmm.
And a similar thing the Geo employs now in terms of giving a very high bandwidth at a low cost.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you want a 5G connectivity with Geo versus Airtel or something, Geo is way too cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So so conversion becomes much easier, and their availability is also stronger, and the network is much stronger. It's also possible that congestion is much lower. But so this has been their strategy. So how would you attribute? Where would you put what label would you put it to this?
Well, I would say it's the the capitalist free market in action.
Pretty much, it is.
So so the word capitalist
This is
is
something a startup entrepreneur who's not funded big
mm,
cannot even think of. This
yeah,
is clearly a large enterprise play.
yeah. I'd say the word capitalist is officially a dirty word. So I would like to run an experience, printing two T-shirts, one saying I'm a socialist, the other one saying I'm a capitalist, walking down in the streets and see
I'll
which
go for capitalist.
which T-shirt gets you the most angry stares.
Oh, we
So,
can.
but so that free capitalist market needs three conditions to work. And so allow me to explain that, and then you will see where entrepreneurs come in. So the first thing is you need to have, it's three P's. The first thing is you need to have private property. Okay, so you can say this is mine, and it is mine because it's a natural law. So property exists not because there is a law. The law exists to protect private property. So it is key. It's inherent to how people behave. There's an economist from Chile, I think his name is um, Hernando de Soto, and,
Mm-hmm.
he said, when you walk in the streets at night in a residential area, dogs will be barking at you because they are locked up in the gates of the houses. And he says, because even dogs understand private property. Uh, so, so private property is one important thing. You make something, it is yours, and then you can sell it. The second one is you need to have prices. Yeah. So prices, like I mentioned with Hayek, is an information system. If somewhere changes in the world, then through prices, you get that signal that people want more of it or less of it. And then the third one is profit and loss. And that is where entrepreneurs comes in, Reliance comes in. So they can come up with an idea and say, we combine this and this and this. We create a product at a very low price and see how it works. And we can try it out and test it out in the market. And if people like it, we can make a profit. If people don't like it and they don't buy it and they don't go for it, we make a loss. We have to go out of business and somebody else will come and buy up our assets. That's actually the hard truth of how the market economy works, how the free capitalist market economy works. Private property, market prices, and profit and loss. So the entrepreneurs, what they do is they focus on that profit and loss.
Oh, Bart, I'm not sure if you have heard of Chanakya.
No, no.
I would urge you to look it up. He's an historical personality in India. someone who lived around 2,300 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was an advisor to an empire at that point of time, which he actually helped in forming, creating. Uh, but he is most regarded for his work on, he's also got another name called Kautilya.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
his work is called Kautilya Shastra, Chanakya Shastra, and the book he has written. And another thing it is referred to as Artha Shastra, which is
Mhm.
essentially economics. So in his book, he also talks about how government should operate and also manage money and also protect private properties, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
What is a private asset, what is an individual's asset, and what are individual rights, and what is the government's right and responsibility, and what is an individual's right and responsibility. This was some 2,300 years ago, and some of it are very, very relevant, and unfortunately they don't get any reference of any of the history of economics, because obviously much of the published account in English comes essentially, I mean, of course, today you will find Chanakya's works in English as well, but these works have not been
Mhm.
studied. So
Yeah.
I think perhaps somewhere you should try picking up this as well, and I'm sure you will appreciate it.
No,
So,
I didn't know that. So thanks a lot for mentioning that. So I would say that free market capitalist economy functions well if these three P's
correct.
are left in peace. So, sorry for the fourth P. So, and in example, just to say, this guy Karl Marx, the one that wanted to destroy the whole system, it's no coincidence that in one of his works he writes, "What we have to do is abolish private property." Right, so that's what he writes. That the comment I make about private property is actually a natural law, and it's the 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 state law exists because there is private property. There is a very good book written by a French philosophist and journalist and economist. His name is Frédéric Bastiat. And so he has a book written, The Law, La Loi, where he explains how that stuff works. I'm not sure whether he ever discovered the writings of the person that you mentioned in India, but it's part of anthropology, I believe, that stuff.
All right. Yeah. His name is Chanakya. Anyway, I'll share the links
Yeah.
with you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
So, perfect. Now, uh, what kind of businesses, or maybe I think what we should probably do is before we get on to your business, uh, I would like to ask you: are there individuals that you can attribute to as people, who have shaped you in your thinking? I mean, of course, now Hayek is one for sure. Whoever
Mhm.
has heard you till now will say it is Hayek. But is there somebody you have met in the course of your journey and who has influenced? It could be your family or anybody who has influenced you in shaping the person that you are.
All right. So I would say number one, when you mentioned Hayek, um, I'm a person who is quite curious by nature. So I like to read a lot. So that's like I've read Hayek, um, but more importantly, I have read Ludwig von Mises, um, as well as Murray Rothbard. So these are guys that do a lot of studies around Austrian School of Economics. And of course, in real life, not in the bookworm type of life, but in real life, yeah, there are always people that shape you. So there are some of my family members that did that, as well as a key person in my life is my mother, who actually shaped me in terms of character. Like it's the can-do attitude, the never give up attitude, the don't be a loser, don't turn like that. So that's the kind of stuff that I got through my upbringing. And then, on a personal note, as a sense of motivation, is also I have my kids. So the stuff that I'm doing right now, what motivates is for me I run my business, and of course I want to make money, and money is important. If you don't make money, that's like not good. But it's also contributing what I have learned to my kids. Now, sadly, my kids, they don't like economics. So they say, Dad, you with your rubbish stuff. So I still have some work to do on that space. That's
No. Give them the rope. I think they will find the thread by themselves. I think it's also mostly common today.
Absolutely. I think as kids, you probably want to do exactly what your parents don't do, or you discover that only later in life.
Correct.
So that's the kind of stuff we go through, right?
Absolutely. I think that is universal, no matter which school of philosophy you believe in, but this is true in every world.
Yeah, or religion or culture you come from.
Absolutely, any of it. But any recommendations that you'd like to make for our audience? I mean, it can be pretty much economics, but you're free to recommend anything, books, podcasts, anything that you recommend that would be really good.
Yeah, I would say that recommendations is number one. If you're an entrepreneur, the most important recommendation or an important recommendation is don't plan too much. I see many would-be entrepreneurs coming up with a fantastic business plan. And then there are the deviations on the business plan. And if that doesn't work, another deviation. And so after you spend hours and days and what have you not on the plan, then you try to find an investor. And then it's like a VC or an angel investor, what exists out there. And then your story typically goes, I studied the market. The market is, is 100 billion. Okay, if I can get 1% of that, that's 1 billion. So dear investor, just give me $100,000. Right? I mean, that's how most entrepreneurs or startup entrepreneurs think, and it's sad. Like you can laugh at it, but I've
Well,
seen
that's true.
many.
That's a fact. Yes, I've seen hundreds of it. Yes, I completely vouch for what you're saying. Yeah.
So when I talk to VCs, I don't work with VCs, but when I talk to VCs, they don't want to hear that. What they want to hear is, what do you have that is going to change people's life? What is a transformation that people get when they buy your product? Do they get a better life? Do they get more pleasure? Do they get less pain? What is that you have? Right? And so in order to understand that, that's where economics comes in. So you have to understand why people buy. What exactly happens at the moment that people buy from you? It's, in economic speak, it's called double inequality of value. So what you give to the client is for the client more valuable than what you get from the client in return. So you need to figure that out some way, one way or another, with with your client, instead of making a business plan and then saying, in the first 5 years I'm going to do this, and then step 2 is that, and then the whole plan doesn't work, and then I mean, don't go that way. Just don't do it. Take action, create something, test it out in the market as soon as possible, and see what comes out. To share with you, for the products that I created, at one point in time, I created a product that I thought was going to be fantastic. Like, what is? I got one customer, one client, and I even hadn't developed the product yet, but the guy gave me the money. So like, oh shoot, now I have to actually make that product for one guy. But I learned a lot from that, and then eventually you can sell it much more. Right? So that's like, also in terms of plans, when I started my journey in economics, like I'm going to explain economics, I thought I was going to work with the big multinational corporations because in the first part of my career, I worked with multinational corporations. So I know how these guys work. Second part, recruiting, did the same, MNCs. So I thought I'm going to do that. That was the plan. But I changed my plan completely. So now I have an online business where I focus on entrepreneurs and business owners, which is very different from what I initially planned.
True. That's what happens with whole entrepreneurship journey because it's very dynamic. We always try to anchor ourselves, but it's in India there is a very actively pursued concept of settling,
Of what? Of
settling down.
okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
So
think that's everywhere.
so you need to settle down by finishing certain academic programs. You need to settle down by landing a job in a big large company, and then settle down by getting married.
Yeah,
You know.
no, yeah. In Singapore, they call it the 5 Cs. The 5 Cs. It's like credit card, car, career, condominium, and then I forgot the last one. I don't know what it is, but so I think every society, every country
Oh,
has something.
only difference here is that there is no credit card here. Uh, uh, I don't think credit card took off as much as in the West, in India at least.
Mhm.
Even today, I think India has perhaps the lowest credit card traction.
Mhm.
Uh, in fact, I think one of the biggest companies which was pushing credit card in India, Citibank, even exited.
All
So
right. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
it's maybe cultural. I think I for one think it's a it's good, but yeah, we can debate about it at a later point of time. So before we close this part of it, any recommendations on the books or podcasts that you follow regularly?
Yes. Um, there's a lot of information to be found, in example, on YouTube. So on YouTube, I would say you go to the a place which is called Mises Week. Mises Week, Mises Week. And so during the summer, they give some sort of a free students class where they have different speakers coming in from all over the world. And these speeches they give there, every speech lasts about 45 minutes. These things are very interesting. And so for me, when that happens, I'm sitting there glued to my computer, listening to these things, transcribing everything. I would say, pardon my words here, but to me, that's kind of intellectual pornography, so to speak. Uh, but then there are also a couple of other good books that I could recommend. Um, One book in particular that stands out is a book that's titled Economics in One Lesson.
Okay.
Economics in One Lesson. It's an unattractive title, and it's written by a man named Henry Hazlitt. Okay.
How do you spell the second name?
Hazlitt is spelled Hazlitt. Henry Hazlitt. Henry Hazlitt is a very good writer. He used to work as a reporter for the New York Times, but he was kicked out because he was a bit too much open market and they didn't like that. And he predicted the collapse of Bretton Woods, which is the monetary system that came down in the early 70s under President Nixon. And so when he was kicked out, he knew the top guys at the Austrian School, and he wrote a book titled Economics in One Lesson. The gist of the book is based on what you see and what you don't see. Yeah. And so it is for every decision that you make in life, there is another decision that you're not going to make. For every action that you take, there's an action you're not going to take. For every action you take now, there's something that you're not going to do in the future. This is something that is discovered by that man I mentioned earlier, Frédéric Bastiat, called La Loi.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, please finish it.
Yeah. Just one more minute on that one. People that use that mental model, okay, what is seen and what is not seen. Henry Hazlitt used that and wrote a book about it and extrapolates that to the price mechanism, profits, government intervention. You check out the book. Yeah. And
Okay, sure.
and a person or two guys that believe in this dictum of what is seen and what is not seen is Warren Buffett and his associate Charlie Munger. They say, for every investment decision, always think what is seen and what is not seen.
Fantastic. Actually, what got my what ticked me was that I sometimes do some sessions for founders, entrepreneurs, and one of the things we talk about also is strategy. So I always say that strategy is as much about what to do and also about what not to do, or rather more about what not to do than what to do. So it sounded very similar to what you were saying. So that's why I was trying to.
One of the most important things is learn to say no. And I believe, was it Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, one of these guys, that said, the more successful you are, the more people will come to you with ideas. And the most successful people are the ones that always say no. So that's, yeah, because you only have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of energy, so you only can do a limited amount of things. And which also brings me to a guy like, in example, Elon Musk. So he's now flying rockets, making electric cars, and doing Twitter. I like Elon Musk.
And also he has a company which does neuro, I forget it, neuro, that they are implanting chips in the brain, right?
I heard something like that.
Neuralink, I think it's called Neuralink or something.
Okay. I think it's just too much. So like,
I for one believe, but I don't know, I could be wrong from what you said, but I think busiest people are the ones who do more things and are the ones who find time for everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
when
I agree with you. It's important to find time, and you have to find time to think. When I was working in the corporate world with the MNCs, the motto was work hard, play hard. I think it's completely dumb and completely stupid. What you have to do is you have to take time to step back, sit back, and think.
I'll put that as a quote at the start of your podcast.
Yeah, don't say people where I live if they are upset with that. All right, but I mean, it's very important to take a step back and to really think, what is it that I'm doing here, right? Which relates to philosophy, which I can explain to you maybe in the next session or now if you want, right?
We'll take it in the next session for sure. Thank you so much, and those of you who have stayed with us till now, I'm sure you enjoyed every bit of it, and I also urge you. I'm sure if you liked it and you've come this far, please share it with all your friends or who you think will appreciate it, and also please come back again to hear what Bart is doing and how he is approaching it and his perspective on how this is impacting the near future and how entrepreneurs are able to use some of these mental models and such. That is the next conversation that we are going to be having, and please come back for that. Thank you so much. And Bart, once again, thank you so much. And we'll catch up with you soon to talk about what and how of it.
All right. Okay. My great pleasure. And thank you very much for the invite. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.